From the famous knuckle tattoo of Post Malone, to the transition of Ozzy Osbourne's poor working youth to the lead singer of famous Black Sabbath, the Beatles have made their mark on a multitude of people around the world for almost 50 years now, and even today are considered to be the greatest band of all time. However, with that said, I urge you to replace this commonplace that they are the greatest band of all time with deducing the network of commonplaces that have kind of built up their legacy, if you will, to being this measuring stick to which all poets and musicians should compare themselves to consider themselves to be the greatest. I'm going to break these down with the two foremost network commonplaces that contributed to the Beatles' legacy, which are the mythology and nostalgia of the generation that was alive to enjoy the Beatles, in addition to the song structure of the Beatles in between music theory and the structure of the lyrics. They're credited with introducing, but rather stole from and were credited with being as the first, and therefore are considered to be the greatest band of all time. So with that said, let's begin with the Beatlemania craze, which, as everyone knows, was, you see these old videos of multitudes of youth and teenagers crazily following and rioting and screaming after the Beatles during their shows and following them in between concerts in the streets. And this is mainly because, up to this point, you had singers such as Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley, where they were the center of attention, and there was little regard given to the bands that were playing for them. However, now, with this new band, each member, John, Paul, George, and Ringo, had their own iconic character that people could see themselves inside of, and, kind of pick their favorite character, similar to Kiss, if you're a fan of Kiss, and they each have their own distinct faces and characteristics. And between this and their unique imagery of the matching haircuts and suits and, constant smile, it's presented a unique charisma that was not seen up until this time and created this Beatlemania craze, these people following and screaming and, going after this band. And, like the most recent example is people rioting over One Direction or Kanye concerts. And this Beatlemania craze can be further elaborated on by someone who was actually alive to have experienced it in Liverpool, England, by the name of Linda Grant, who is a famous novelist of Britain. She goes on to say, "I didn't have an impulse to scream, but that was what you did. There was this cult-like element to it, which basically could be deduced as saying it wasn't about the music, it was about the craze, the sense of community, the sense of, I guess, a mob tendency to it, that kids could, connect with each other. There was a sense of community." And with this said, drummer Ringo himself has been credited with saying around this time, I believe 1963, "They never came to hear our show, they came to see us." And I like how he juxtaposes between the words hear and see in this sentence, because it characterizes what had happened at that time. It no longer became about their music and their lyrical themes and how they sounded. People were literally screaming over their concerts because they were infatuated with the image. And this image, through the world's longest game of telephone, from our grandparents to our parents to us, and documentaries we see on TV, they're credited with being the greatest band of all time because of the craze. And it was no longer about the sound, it was about this image, this legacy, this iconic look that was impossible to be replicated. And with that said, we should probably talk about the music because it is a band. It's kind of important. So the Beatles mainly used G major and C major chords, which were easier on the ears, and used these chords in addition with repetitive rhythms and an emphasis on the chorus, which is repeated so that the listener can hear it on the radio and immediately be able to sing it and recite it and memorize it and, enjoy it in concerts or in the radio or in the comfort of their own home. And while they are credited with being as the first to introduce this new concept of choruses and repeating rhythms and using the right chords and key signatures that are catchier for people and they feel more inclined to listen to them, it was actually blues artists such as Little Richard, Howlin' Wolf, and Robert Johnson introduced these themes. And the Beatles, when they were first formed in 1961, were covering these songs in local clubs and bars when they were first gaining notoriety. However, no due credit was given to these musicians at the time, so the Beatles played it off as their own material. In a famous letter in 1971, John Lennon goes on to say, "It wasn't a ripoff, it was a love-on. Blues was not popular at the time with the African-American youth." So what could that be? Can be summed up as, at the time, he claimed for it to not be popular, and therefore he introduced it and made it popular. And again, throughout the ages, people associated what they did with every album, from Rubber Soul to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band to Abbey Road, as monumental as it had never been done before, whereas by contrast it had. It had been done by blues musicians. And even at that time, musicians such as Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan, the latter of which went on to win a Nobel Peace Prize in Literature for his contributions, used prose and poetry concepts in addition to his blues roots to sing about a range of themes ranging from drug addiction to impending doom to loss to love and happiness and peace, whereas the Beatles stayed within the category of peace and love and anti-war songs, which again appealed to the masses at that time, which were youth stuck in this counterculture movement of the Vietnam War, which contributed to their fame. And so, with these two commonplaces introduced, I urge you to move towards a new commonplace that just because your predecessors told you that, oh, the nostalgia of this band, oh, they were the first to do this and they were so monumental, it doesn't make them the best. As I would say, well, yes, they deserve every ounce of success that they have earned throughout the years, as well as their legacy. I think that Michael Jackson was a more charismatic performer. I think Tupac and Alice in Chains had more relatable lyrics and a greater range of themes than what the Beatles had, which is mainly radio pop songs that had the same concepts of love and then later on more psychedelic themes. And so with this said, I urge you to not disrespect the Beatles or slander them, but rather give credit where credit is due, but acknowledge that just because it came first does not make it the greatest. Led Zeppelin could be the greatest, or Pink Floyd, or even Post Malone. So with that said, happy listening.